Thank you, 1.5 fret and the 8.5 fret as well. We'll get into that today on Dulcimerica. Thanks for joining me. My name is Futch. We're going to be talking about these two frets and how you can use them, how you can get used to using them, and what difference do they make in the grand scheme of things for the mountain dulcimer. Thanks for being here. We'll cover that today. But before I go any further, I want to say hello to one of my patrons on Patreon, Cameron Woods. Cameron, thank you very, very much for becoming a part of my art recently. You joined a wonderful community that I'm very fond of. Every single morning I wake up and think, what can I do for my wonderful patrons who are out there and just every day helping to make things happen. That includes brand new music, tablature, books, CDs, and videos, all coming your way, including Dulcimerica, which is produced in part by my patrons every single month. So Cameron, thank you for joining up, and I hope you enjoy everything that you discover here on the Patreon feed. For those of you wondering what this whole Patreon thing is, it's basically a subscription service. $5 a month gets you in the door and able to access everything I've ever produced, self-produced, and everything that I will self-produced as long as you're a patron. There's a lot of stuff involved there, and you can check it all out following the link below, patreon.com/BingFutch. Go to the featured tag section, click on the open house section, and then download to your heart's content. Everything you find there is yours to keep, and if you like, please do consider becoming a part of my art, just like Cameron. Again, Cameron, thank you very, very much. You'll get a lot of stuff just like this every single week, where I talk about elements of the mountain dulcimer and help you become a better mountain dulcimer player so you can use these tools that are at our disposal. And one of these tools is extra frets. The mountain dulcimer was a diatonic instrument at one point in time, meaning it was built off a 7-note scale. That changed somewhere in the 50s with the addition of the 6.5 fret in the first octave and then the 13.5 fret in the second octave. That extra half step gave us the ability to take the DAD tuning, which was previously just simply known as the Mixolydian mode, but out of that, to tune into D, we now know it as DAD. By playing the scale, the major scale, in that we had to have that 6.5 fret to play all the notes properly, to raise that 7th note up a half step. And that made a huge difference for a lot of mountain dulcimer players who were really getting into this 1-5-8 tuning, DAD tuning, or CGC, or EBE, or any of those. So along about the 70s, the 1.5 fret began showing up, and people began kind of looking like, I don't know, we're getting farther and farther away from the very simple nature of the diatonic instrument, but also discovering how much more fun you could have by adding a couple of half steps right there down low on the instrument as opposed to near the top of the first octave. And of course the 8.5 is the second octave equivalent. Now before I go any further, I do want to say, if you have a diatonic dulcimer and you want to add one of these extra half steps, please make sure you do so not only in your first octave but in your second octave as well. Because what will happen is, even if you don't play a lot in the upper octave, someday you just might. And all the things that you can do in your first octave with those additional half steps, you won't be able to do in your upper octave because they won't be there waiting for you. And that can cause a problem when you're trying to take things up and do some fun stuff in the upper octave. So make sure when you get these extra frets that you do get them in both the first octave and the second octave of the mountain dulcimer. Having said that, here we've got the 6.5 fret, 13.5, and then here's the 1.5. So if I cover the 1.5 fret up with my finger, you get what most standard mountain dulcimers look like. You got a wide space between frets, and in this case the nut and the fret, then a wide space between those two frets, and then you've got a narrow space between these two frets. So that's a wide space, which is a whole step, another wide space, which is a whole step, and then a narrow space, which is a half step. So if I remove my finger and you reveal that we've got this extra half step now there in the middle, what we've got in between frets 1 and 3 is a 3-step chromatic movement. So we can take what we're doing here and go up chromatically 3 steps. By having that kind of option available to us, we can change chords from major to minor and back again, and that's not something not a, what's the word I'm looking for, a luxury that we have been able to do on a diatonic mountain dulcimer. We're either locked in to the 3 major chords, the 3 minor chords, and the 1 diminished chord out of every single scale. The half steps give us the ability to change the flavoring of some of these chords and give us some more color options when we're playing. So that's going to help a lot. The other thing you'll notice by having this additional fret is that it now looks a little bit, not even a little bit, it looks a lot like what's happening right here at the top of our first octave. We've got 3 half steps in a row, just like down here. So if you've wrapped your head around what you can do with the 6.5 fret, you're already halfway there between learning all about the 6.5 fret and the options available there, and your 1.5 fret and all the options available to you down here. So if you're used to working with it here, you'll be fine down here, except for one thing. That's going to be getting used to visually looking at this fret and not counting it as fret number 2. Since this is fret number 2, anything that we've done before that we've run willy-nilly down the fretboard, we now have to consider this, whether it be hopping over it or sliding past it, or just judging what we're playing based on a visual recognition. A lot of people do that. They look at their fretboard and they're able to look at it and say, this is what I'm doing based on everything else that's around where I'm playing that note. By adding one more fret, that can freak you out a little bit visually. But my big solution to that is when you first get the 1.5 fret, ignore it. Don't use it, don't touch it, don't play it. Just get used to working around it, maneuvering around it. And then when it's not so freaky anymore and you realize that the 2nd fret is right here and that 1 is here and 3 is here, once that's stuck in your head, then you can start getting in there and dropping that finger in for the 1.5 on the middle string and on the bass and on the melody string, because it makes sense now. You know you're dealing with the 1.5 fret and you're not still trying to get your head around the fact that you've got another half step in the lower section of the mountain dulcimer octave. So get used to it. Play everything you would normally play on the mountain dulcimer, but get used to maneuvering around that fret, and then start working it in with some of the tricks and some of the information I'm about to show you right now. Starting off with, what notes do we have there now that we've added the 1.5 fret? So assuming that we are in DAD tuning, this is going to bring in 2 notes. One that's already been with us and one that is very, very new to the fretboard. The one that's been very much with us the whole time is C. That's on the middle string at the 1.5 fret. We've had C before. We've got C at the 6th fret bass string, and we have C at the melody string at the 6th fret, C natural. If we go up a half step from the 6th fret, then we know that we've got C sharp. So from C to C sharp on the bass string, and from C to C sharp on the melody string. So C is not an unusual thing for us to have on the mountain dulcimer fretboard, but it's new to have it down here as a lower tone hanging out with other lower tones, and that's really going to be helpful. Now we've also got a note that's new to the fretboard for us, and that is F. F natural on the bass string, and then on the melody string we've got F. Once again, we've got a half step right above that, which means that that F will become F sharp when it comes up to the 2nd fret, as well as the melody string F becomes F sharp, moving from the 1.5 fret to the 2nd fret. It's a good idea to kind of keep that in your head when you start building chords. You know where all these notes are located. So we've got C on the middle string, F on the bass string, and F on the melody string. Now that we know what notes we have, what chords are available to us with the addition of this half step? Why is it so important for us to have it right there? Why does it work so well there? Why did we choose that area to bring in a half step? Well, here are a couple of reasons. Number one, this has probably been my favorite one, is it now gives us a low C major chord. We play 3, 1.5, and 1. And we've got the 3 notes of C major. We've got C, once again, there on the middle string at the 1.5 fret. That's the root of the chord. We've got G, and the G is going to be the perfect fifth of the chord. That's at the 3rd fret on the bass string. And we've got E on the melody string at the 1st fret, and the E is going to be our major 3rd. So playing all of those together will give us a nice, rich sounding C major chord. We can also invert that chord and flip it around like that. And we have a different voicing of the C major chord. And then I'll go back to that. C major. Okay, so the C majors that we've had before have been moderate to high on the scale. For example, we've got 3, 4, 6. It's kind of a bright and shiny C major. We can invert that and play 6, 4, 3. And then we've also got barring at the 6th fret, which technically would be a C5 chord. That's a rootless, sorry, not a rootless, but it is a root 5 chord, which means there is no 3rd in the chord. The only notes in there are the root of the chord and the 5th of the chord. By barring at the 6th fret, that gives us a C5, which means that that could be not only a C major, that could also be C minor if the song ever called for it. You won't articulate the minor 3rd, but you could probably sing the minor 3rd or have another instrument take that minor 3rd and you can still play along. It's a good thing to know. Or we can add to the bar, we can go ahead and just put our thumb down here at the 8th fret, and that will give us a full C major chord. We can also invert that chord. Now those C majors are, like I said, moderately high on the fretboard in the octave and also way at the top of the octave. So anytime that we're playing a tune that is really living way down here in the first 3 fret range, that means that when we throw a C major chord in there, we have to kind of leave where we've been living and go outside the neighborhood to pull that C major chord in. For example, Old Joe Clark, which is a Mixolydian tune that not only uses C natural as a melody note, it also uses C major as a chord in a tune that is in the key of D, mind you. So these are accidentals. They're not part of the scale because C sharp is actually part of the D major scale. So when we play Old Joe Clark, we tend to play it like this. So all of this other stuff we're doing, the drones are down low, the melody is down low, but we're hopping all the way up here to get that C major chord in there. But not if you have a 1.5 fret, because now you can play it down here. And that just sounds so much more satisfying. It's of the family of pitches that we're working with already, and it's a lot easier to get your melody note in there and play that chord. And it sounds absolutely fabulous, as you can tell. So that's one reason I really, really love it. My favorite reason is we have a low C major chord. The other thing I really like about this is that is going to give us the ability to play in the key of C very, very simple songs without retuning. And we do that by adding another chord, and this chord is new to us in DAD tuning and also in the key of D. It's F natural, F major. F major is the chord. So we'll do an L-shaped chord from the bass string, 1.5, 1.5, 4, and that gives us a very nice F major chord. So here's how we're going to use that F chord. We're not going to use it a whole bunch in the key of D because F sharp is what's going to be native to the key of D major. So how are we going to use this? As I mentioned before, very simple tunes we can play now in the key of C without having to retune. So how that works is very simple tunes. I talk about basically 1, 4, 5 tunes. These are songs that have just the 3 chords, and they are based off the 1st, 4th, and 5th notes of the scale, which for the key of C, C major, F major, and G major, those 3 chords would be your 1, 4, 5 chords for C. So we've got C major down here, and we have our F. And of course we've got G major, which we can play with a 3-1-0. So if you're singing something in D and it's just a little too hard to manage because D is hard to sing in for a lot of different people, you can take it down a step and save your voice and find it just as easy as playing D, G, and A in the key of D. So, you know, how about the Mountain Dulcimer National Anthem? In D. Boil them cabbage down, boys, turn them hoe cakes round. The only song that I can sing is boil them cabbage down. Take it down. Boil them cabbage down, boys, turn them hoe cakes round. The only song that I can sing is boil them cabbage down, boys. So that's really big stuff right there, being able to take a whole bunch of tunes, and if they're simple, 1, 4, 5, only using the major chords out of the scale, you've got an easy way of doing that in C, and you don't have to retune to C, G, G, or C, G, C to make it happen. That's bonus for a lot of folks right there, and it's very, very quick and painless, I would like to think. What else can we do with this 1.5 fret? Oh, there's so much. Here's another thing we can do with it. We can take D major and we can turn it into D minor just by lowering the minor third. Of course, D, F sharp, and A is going to make a D major chord. We've got D on the middle string at the 3rd fret. We've got A on the melody string at the 4th fret. And then we've got F sharp on the bass string at the 2nd fret. F sharp, as we looked at earlier, if you take it down to the 1.5 fret, that's going to flatten that note. So F sharp down to here will give us F. So if I move my finger down there, we now have D minor. And of course we can invert that. Because of the 1.5 fret being right there, we can also do this with A major. With A major, we've got A on the melody string, 4th fret, C sharp on the middle string at the 2nd fret, E on the bass string at the 1st fret. And once again, we're going to take the minor or the major third, C sharp, and take it down a half step from C sharp down to the 1.5 fret where we're going to hit that C natural. And now we've got an A minor chord. Very nice. And one more color that we can add to the rainbow of colors we can play on the Mountain Dulcimer. We can also, because of these flatted, the C and the F, that takes both of the notes that are sharped in the key of D and takes them down a half step and flattens them, which means that we are now able to bounce around in the key of D minor. D minor has a relative major key, which is F. That means that we, very carefully, can play in the keys of D minor and F. That adds 2 more keys to the keys we can already play with everything going on in DAD tuning, which is awesome. But if you simply walk down from the 1.5 fret on the melody string and then bring it over to the middle string and finally the bass string, we're hitting key points of the D minor pentatonic scale, which is the blues scale, and that's going to give you a lot more ability to play blue notes and otherwise sass things up when you're playing in the key of D. A lot of folks are enjoying playing all different types of Americana with a big roots feel to it, and some of those blue notes that are involved in there, and that gives us a convenient set of blue notes right there under our fingertips from the 1.5 fret on down to the open position. I like that a lot. Let's take a look at this. We've got some 7th chords that are new to us down here. Now we've always been able to play an A7, which is going to be 1, 2, 3. A seventh chord technically is a major chord with a fourth note added, and that fourth note is the flattened seventh note of the associated scale. So for A major, we have A, C sharp, and E. That seventh note would be G sharp of the A major scale. We take it down a half step, and you end up with G. So replace one of those three notes, since we can only play 3 notes at a time, with this way of playing the mountain dulcimer. If you've got a 4-string equidistant dulcimer, you can play all 4 notes. I'm going to replace the A on the melody string at the 4th fret with the G that's right below it. And now we've got what works completely as an A7 chord. Now note how my finger, my thumb, and my index finger are forming this shape, like a diagonal if I were to connect the two of those with a line. If I take my finger up off of the bass string and slide these two fingers down to where they're playing 1 1/2 and 2, and leave that bass string open, I now have done the exact same thing with D major, and we have a D7 chord. And all we're playing is D on the bass string, C on the 1 1/2 fret, and F sharp on the melody string. So we are not playing A at all, and we don't need to, and that's kind of cool. Keep sliding that configuration of fingers down, and we get into a G7 chord. Once again playing D on the bass string, we've got a B on the middle string, and we've got F on the melody string. So that works as a G7. So we've got A7, we've got D7, we've got G7. Great. So what do you do with seventh chords? And how are you supposed to use them? Well, oftentimes when you see seventh chords, you see them written and it'll say D with a 7 next to it. And if you were unsure of how to play that particular chord, you could simply play D and don't worry about the 7, and it sounded fine. So that gives you one little clue, is you can put a 7th chord in there in place of a standard chord. But typically what's happening with that 7th chord is it's creating musical tension by including that note. And you can hear it. You can hear that tension. That's not a chord that is restive. It's restless. It wants to resolve. It wants to do something else. And so music is largely about musical tension and release, setting up that tension and then resolving that tension in many different ways. So listen to how this resolves from D7 to G. Isn't that great? That is the end of the song. It's just a beautiful resolution. So you don't always want to go and make it just the second to last chord that you play. It's just creating tension that is then relieved when you go to certain chords. And look how very little motion is taking place here. Each one of my fingers is going to go 1 fret in the opposite direction from each other. As is said in the great movie Contact, small moves, Ellie, small moves. Let's take a listen to the G7 chord as it resolves back to a D major. There's that great resolution again. So a 7th chord could be put in, if you're playing a normal D or a G or an A, you could put that 7th chord in maybe towards the last 2 beats of a measure, or depending on how fast your tune is moving, the last measure before you make a change to a different chord. And that tension and release is very, very satisfying to the human animal, and it gives you a lot of things to work with. Here's a Amazing Grace with no 7th chords. Now here's Amazing Grace with 7th chords. So I like to think of 7th chords as a sweet little kiss on the cheek as you're moving on to another chord. And they're easy to drop in every once in a while, and the more you play with them, the more you'll find just how much color they add to your arrangements. So there's a good example of what you can do with 7th chords. There's also another kind of chord hanging out down here that's a lot of fun to play with, and that is an augmented chord. We have an A augmented chord. So if we have a typical A chord like this, the augmented chord is a major chord that takes the fifth, the perfect fifth, and it takes it up a half step. It sharpens that 5. So in this case, with A, C sharp, and E on the melody string at the 1st fret, we're going to take that up to F. We're going to take it up in a half step from E to F. And there you've got the mystical sounding augmented chord. Without the augmented chord, there would never have been any music in the vast darkness of space. Why? Because every time you watch a movie, what do you hear in the background? A space movie, that is. If you're watching a space movie, you typically hear this somewhere in the soundtrack. It's just so vast and open and wide. Something about that chord. So if you've got some space music you want to write, the augmented chord is perfect. But it also works very nice and harmonically with your 7th chords if you're doing blues, jazz, big band music. And that's what I opened up the episode with, is something that sounds like this. A7, G7, D7. And I didn't go all the way, so let me do that again. And what I'll be doing here after that is walking down that D minor pentatonic scale and then bouncing back up to the A augmented. Goes like this. In fact, if you listen to just the A augmented chord going into a D, it sounds like the last 2 chords of the Looney Tunes theme, you know? That's all, folks. It's all these small moves and the tension and release created by those small moves is where we start to see where these half steps come into play for adding additional bits of color and drama into our music. And so we like the half steps for doing that. So that's a good look at some of the stuff that you can do with the 1.5. You can also play a G major scale down here, as opposed to playing it up the fretboard this way. So you got G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. We can do the same thing now across the strings, lower, starting here. It's the same pitch, but we don't have to move all the way up the fretboard. G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. So we have a G major scale right down here, which means, and this is awesome, that you no longer have to capo 3 to get into the key of G. You can now play it from the open position, and you've got your fundamental chords down here, and you've got the melody notes available to you to play all your melody as well. And you don't lose those 3 frets because we've actually got the capo off of the instrument, and you can play it right there. So another big plus for having the 1.5 fret down here. So let me show you one more thing, and this is another reason why I always say make sure that you get your extra frets in both the 1st octave and the 2nd octave, because here's the 8.5 fret. So of course all the things I just showed you down here are available to you up here, plus other stuff that's not available down here. See, down here we're going to run out of space once we get to the nut there's no more. But being up here in this position, we can go past the nut and we can get some more fun. So let me show you this. We've got that right there is an F major chord of a different shape. Down here I showed you a L-shaped chord for F major. But here, because we can shoot past where the nut would be, we've got the ability to play a different shape. And this shape is an extended slant. So that actually intersects with the 6.5 fret down here, the original addition to the mountain dulcimer, and this is fortuitous. Why? Because we can now use this 6.5 fret to change the nature of the F major chord by taking that third, that major third, and dropping it down a half step to get F minor. We can also play F minor. So both instances of those coming out of C gives us the ability to play heartbreaking songs that do the familiar pattern of 1, 4, minor 4. That's going to be 1, the root of the chord, major chord, going to the 4 chord, which is major, and then taking that 4 chord and making it a minor. That is a powerful, powerful thing that we can do up here with this F major and minor combination. So if I'm playing in C major, for example, I could go, there are places I remember all my life, though some have changed, some forever, not for better. Some have gone and some remain. That opens up other songs that we can play. And once you start to understand about how those chords work together, you'll find that you really enjoy having these half steps. And because we've got this extra half step down here, take a look at what happens to the rest of the fretboard. That leaves now just 1, 2, 3 notes away from being fully chromatic. Before you had the 1.5 fret, you were 1, 2, 3, 4 steps away, 4 notes away from being fully chromatic. With that 1.5 fret in there, you're only 3 steps away. 3 steps you're not considering, 3 notes you're not thinking about. That's not a lot to add onto your plate. And once again, I am not supportive of the idea that the diatonic dulcimer or the semi-diatonic dulcimer should ever go away in favor of the chromatic. I think all of them should coexist together. They all have their strengths. They all have their possibilities. But you're not that far away from being able to contemplate chromatic music theory, and it's just around the corner. So think about that as you continue to add half steps, because I know some people are adding the half fret right there. And I know people are adding a 3.5 as well. So once you get to that point, you might want to consider grabbing yourself a chromatic and going to town. So I hope this has been helpful for you, and I hope that you will use this 1.5 fret, get to know it, and then begin to incorporate some of these wonderful colors that you can get, some of these wonderful dramatic moments you can get with the instrument, and I think you'll enjoy your time with the dulcimer a lot more once you get your head wrapped around it. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and I will be back again with more next week. Until then, keep playing and having fun.